Hi everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today we are doing another mod review for the mod called Imperium Aurorae. But before this video begins, don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Did you know there's only about a 17% chance that you're subscribed, yet you're still watching my videos, so do us both a favor and subscribe to the channel. With that out of the way, let's jump into the mod. The mod Imperium Aurorae is a fantastic mod that I actually just found today. It's a mod that I had to go pretty far back in the Steam page to find. However, it still works, and although it hasn't been updated in about a year, it still works pretty well. I've done a little bit of tester runs with it and everything seems to work fine. It doesn't crash, so that's pretty good. Typically you're able to know if a mod works if it crashes or not right off the bat. This mod, Imperium Aurorae, is basically an alternate history mod where history meets fantasy, where mythological elements of various cultures are real and some very interesting twists of fate have occurred. In Albanin, the descendants of Arthur Pendrag clash with the Anglo-Saxons, with the Picts experiencing a revival. In France and Germany, the defeat of Karl Pepinson at the hands of the Saxons has shaped a lasting enmity between the Franks, Saxons, while classic Eastern Roman factionalism has plunged the empire into another civil war shortly after reunifying from the Carthage of misdirected crusade. And from Antioch, the Prince of Aurora spreads a Sino-Hellenistic hybrid culture and religion, having shattered Christendom by taking the Apostolic Palace itself. So this mod is basically kind of a combination of history and fantasy, which is really cool. And of course, I'm going to show you everything that has changed as well as the brand new features that have been added to this mod, because there are a lot, so stay tuned. To start off, one of the things that has completely been changed are the religions. So this mod adds a plethora of new religions, which we will go ahead and go over. There's actually a lot. This is probably the most religions I've ever seen in an EU4 mod. And I know, of course, this is not historically accurate whatsoever. This is meant to be fantasy, but I absolutely love when mods add new religions. I've said this numerous times. It really adds a lot to the mod, adds a lot to the flavor. New religions in EU4 really make other nations a lot more fun to play, and is definitely a great divergence from the normal Catholic, Orthodox, and pretty much just Muslim thing that you can get in the base game. Starting off, we have Iberia. So as you can see, Iberia is split here. Now, I'm not really going to go over the nations, as this is just not really that important. I mean, it is important, but not in Iberia. It's more important up here in the Holy Roman Empire, and especially in the north in England. However, over here in Iberia, we have, of course, what you would expect here: Aragon, Leon, Valencia, Castile. However, what is interesting here is that there's actually another religion here, this one. So if you look here, it's yellow and you think, oh, it's all Catholic. No, this one is actually Franctelli, I think is how you say it. I'm probably saying it wrong, but basically it's kind of like a Catholic heresy that branched out from the Franciscan order of monks. So you actually have this right here, and it gives these modifiers. It gives the -6 local unrest, at least I think it does. It basically just gives, yeah, the +2 tolerance of the true faith, which equals -6 national unrest, which is honestly really cool. Again, I love when it adds other little religions here, especially little heresies like this. To the south, as you can see, we have Andalusia and Granada. It's kind of split up as well, so you have Andalusia and then you have Granada. To the north, Andalusia is actually Zikri, which I've actually never heard of this religion. I don't even know if it's real. I'm assuming it is. We have Zikri right here, which is kind of like this Muslim religion, but is somewhat different, I guess, which is really cool to see. And of course, to the south, we have Granada, which is, of course, Sunni. So that is what we have in Iberia. As far as the cultures go, one thing that is very interesting, and this mod does add other cultures, is Visigothic. So look, we have the Visigoths here in Andalusia, part of Castile, and of course into Aragon, which is absolutely lovely. And look, see, they are connected with the Visigoths and the Vandals, and there are actually the Vandals in North Africa, which is really cool to see. Going just south of Iberia into the Almohads, as you can see, the Almohads actually have their own religion. As we can see right here, they are called Almohadi, which I absolutely love their little symbol, by the way, the peacock feather, really cool. Almohadi gives -1% missionary strength, an extra advisor, +3 tolerance of the true faith, which is really nice, -1 tolerance of heretics, -1 tolerance of heathens. All in all, not a very good religion, to be honest, but they are Muslim, which is interesting. I don't really understand these kind of separate religions where they are Muslim, sort of, but they also have access to the different Muslim schools, so that's really interesting. If someone in the comments knows and can kind of clarify that, that would definitely be very helpful, as I tried looking in the mod, but it really doesn't look like there's been much movement for this mod since last year. So definitely know if you know anything in the comments down below. Going further east, we actually have Algeria, and Algeria is actually Aryan or Aryan, as you can see here, the very old Christian religion, kind of the very first Christians that you had in Western Europe were of this kind of Christianity. That gives plus 10 national tax modifier, minus 10% stab cost modifier. And I mentioned this before when we were looking at Iberia, but we actually have Valandia, who has the lovely Tunis flag here, but they are the Vandals. So you have the Vandal Christians here, and they're Vandals, of course, and they are the Aryan religion, and they actually have the religion right here and the culture as well as Aryan, but they are a kind of a weird princedom. I guess they're kind of like a elective monarchy or something like that, or I guess they're kind of like some weird republic, which is really cool to see. And this is the culture over here. We have the Teutons. I, again, don't fully understand why the Teutons are here. This is a fantasy mod, so you can kind of just do whatever you want, but the Teutons are right here, and I don't know if I mentioned that, but I'm mentioning it now. We actually have the Teutons here, and they are actually Aryan. They are not Catholic, and of course, the Teutons are going to be Teuton, and they are connected to the Germanic cultures, which you would expect. And over here, we have the Vandals, who are going to be connected with the Visigoths, and we have the Algerians and the Berbers and stuff like that. Going further east, to go ahead and look at the map, you can see we have these various other tags, Egypt, Sinai, things like that. But what is really interesting right here are the religions. So we have some Catholic here in the south. This country down here, this little chiefdom, is actually Catholic, which is pretty nice. And then in North Africa, we actually have the Deo-Hellenic, which is really cool. So this is kind of like that religion that I mentioned before when I was reading off the description from the mod page, where it says kind of like this Cyano-Hellenic religion, and this is that. And it talks about it being founded by the Prince of the Celestial Aurora, Chen, this guy here. It blends the faith and the wisdom of the ancient Greek philosophy with the harmonious principles of Taoism. It is really, really cool here, and I love these new religions. This one actually gives here plus 3 missionary strength, may recruit female generals, which is interesting, and plus 10 reform progress growth. Really, really powerful religion. Oh, and did I mention that this one is part of the CHE? So not the HRE, the CHE, which is the Celestial Hellenic Empire. And we actually have this guy here who is, I guess, kind of like the Pope. Yeah, this is sort of the Pope, Antioch. And the Pope is actually in charge of the Celestial Hellenic Empire and has all these little vassals underneath it where they can vote for him. Basically the HRE, just the CHE instead. One of the things that I did want to show you was actually the religion here. So it's the Dio-Hellenic, and it gives these things that we covered before, and it actually allows you to choose from these different deities. So it's very similar to kind of how Norse paganism in EU4 works. So you kind of have all these different deities, which gives these fantastic modifiers, by the way. We have a Vesta here, which is amazing, minus 20% advisor cost. We have all these other ones right here. And speaking of this, we can go ahead and look at the religions here in the Italian peninsula. So we actually have the Antioch, who is currently being held by the Celestial Hellenic Empire, by the Diano-Hellenic. But then we actually have the Catholics, of course, as you would expect in Italy, and to the north, of course, the more Diano-Hellenic, and Genoa is actually Diano-Hellenic. And we actually have Aquileia, and no Venice. Actually, no, we do have Venice, but Venice is Catholic, and most of their territory is going to be held by Friuli and Aquileia. Going to look at the cultures, these are the cultures that we have, as you can see, relatively the same here as you would kind of expect, but then you also have this one right here, kind of like this Greek culture here. I guess it's supposed to be sort of similar to the Byzantine remnants that you kind of have. Going over to France, this is essentially how France looks. France is really split up, so we of course have our lovely France here, ruled by the Capetians, very, very nice, but it is completely split up with a bunch of different tags. You have France here, who kind of are just concentrated around here in Paris, Alençon, and then further west you have Reims, who is currently being held by Champagne. France is actually split here. They have a couple provinces right here. And to the south, you actually have the Duchy of Toulouse. And if you go ahead and look at the religions in France, well, things are quite a bit different, even though they are the same color. France is basically split between Fractielli and then also some Catholic in the north. So we actually have France, who's Catholic, but then the guys over here are Fractielli. I really wish that they honestly made the color a bit different on the map. I do see that it is a little bit darker than the Catholic, but if you zoom out, you really can't tell other than the name. But I do wish that they added it to a different color. However, this is fine. And one of the things that I do like, again, that I already mentioned before, is the addition of new Christian religions. I really, really like that. And speaking of the new religions, we also have the new cultures. So you can see these are the cultures here in France. It looks like they're relatively the same as the base game. You have Breton, who I do hope, yes, is kind of grouped with the Celtic religions here, which is really nice. I don't necessarily know about them being grouped with Irish, but being grouped with all these other ones is pretty cool. We also have the Normans in the north, who are currently grouped with all the French ones. You have the Outremer culture, which I was going to cover before, but it's kind of hard to ignore it now, but very nice. We have the Outremer culture, which is basically kind of the remnants of the Crusaders. I did not see that it was right here. I saw earlier when I was reviewing the mod that it was over here. I did not see that it is right here. That is really, really cool. The British Isles is completely split up. You basically don't have anything else. You have Anglo-Saxonia. You have this one right here. You have Gwynedd, who is basically Wales. And further north, you kind of have Northumberland, which we know is a tag from EU4. We have Scotland, who has the junior partner of Brittany. I actually did not realize that. That is really cool. The junior partner of Brittany is Scotland. They are Fractielli, which is really nice. We have Ireland, even though Ireland does not own all of Ireland, which is interesting to see. Instead, Ireland is kind of split with the Welsh, Connacht, and then to the north you have Scotland. But I do imagine that if you were to leave the AI Ireland alone, they would probably be able to conquer most of the island. And to the north, where Scotland should be, there is Scotland, but there's also Gaeldom, and you also have Norway holding these islands over here, who are actually Druid. That is really cool. I did not actually see that. But yes, we actually have Druid, and of course, I did see this before, the lovely Norse Iceland over here. It's kind of hard to ignore, but we have the lovely Norse Iceland. And to the very north, we actually have Gaeldom being Druid, which is really cool. I don't know if some of you have seen that mod. I covered a mod a while back where they added Druidism. Is really cool religion, which is what you would expect. It's similar to Norse in that regard, and having a Druid state up here is really, really cool, as it seems like every country in every region is going to have the Fractielli, but we have the Fractielli, and then we have, of course, the Catholics over here, and the Norse in Ireland, and the Norse in Iceland. Also, we have the Norse in Greenland, which is really cool. You actually have the Jomvikings, which are a holy state, which is really cool, and they, of course, are reformed Norse faith, which is interesting. Taking a look at Central Europe, basically the HRE, and there is no HRE, we already covered that. This is really how it looks. It has a lot more tags in the base game. Some tags have kind of taken over more than others, as we can see right here. And this is really how the religion looks. It is going to be split by the Fractielli, as you would expect. We actually have quite a few of these in the Low Countries as well. And further south, we actually have mostly Catholic. So the HRE is mostly going to be Catholic, with a few of these little Franciscan religions right here. Again, it's kind of hard to see, but I had to zoom out so you could see the names right here. This is how the cultures look. It does look like they're pretty much the same. You are going to have, I think, a few different ones here, especially in their placements, but it looks relatively the same. As far as the tags go, we of course have Austria, Bohemia, Swabia, other different tags like that. We have Alsace, which is really nice to see. We have this one right here, and as well as some other tags. Going further east, we have Poland, Galicia, Volhynia. Again, these guys are mostly going to be Catholic. However, the further east you go is where it really starts to evolve in kind of a hodgepodge of various religions. We have the Iconoclasts, we have Orthodoxy, we have the Remuvas, we have, of course, some Catholics here. Would not be complete without the Catholics. We have Suomenskos, we have the Bogomilists here as well, which is really interesting to see. Bogomilism actually gives these modifiers right here. It gives a minus 10% sap cost and plus 10% morale of armies. And further east, we actually have, again, Paulician, and Paulician gives minus 20% sap cost and plus 10% tolerance of heathens, which is really neat to see. And of course, we have the Tangri, and in the middle of it, we have the Suomensko. Actually, have the Monolithic, which is really cool to see as well. And all in all, the religions in Eastern Europe, as well as going into Siberia, are really, really interesting. We have the Manichaean in far, far eastern Siberia, which I covered before. The Manichaean religion, which is plus 2% tolerance of heathens, which is really, we have the Vargiana, who are the Buddhists, and far eastern Siberia is mostly going to be Tangri with Manichaean and some Buddhism. However, the further west that you go is really where you're going to have kind of the hodgepodge of the different religions here. And speaking of the religions, we actually have the cultures right here. So these are the cultures. It is Muscovite. It's going to be a lot of Cuman, as you can see, and that makes sense because Cumania is right there. It's absolutely huge. It's, in fact, I think one of the biggest nations at the start of the game. It's number 3, okay? and Cumania is definitely the biggest in this part of the world, at least. So you have Cumania, you have Yulva, you have Vladimir, who's going to be the biggest one right here. These guys are going to mostly be the ones who are going to be Cuman as well. They're actually the Tengri. And if you go and look here to the north, we actually have the Karelians, who are Orthodox, which is really nice to see. You have some other little Norse pagans right here, as you can see right here. And then if you go ahead and go even further west, we of course have Sweden and Norway, who all follow the Catholic religion. And in Finland, you have the Suomenskos. Going to the south, in the Balkans and Anatolia, this is really how it looks. You have the Venetian colonies here in Dalmatia, which is something that I spotted right away. As far as the religions go, this is really how the religions look right here. You have the Orthodoxy here in Serbia. You actually have some of the brotherhoods and things like that. You have Bogomolist. You have iconoclasts here in Romania, namely Wallachia and parts of Bessarabia. You have, of course, some Catholics. You have some Paulician. It is really kind of a mess here. It's not as much of a mess here in Eastern Europe, as you can see with all the very weird painted map, but it is kind of interesting here in Anatolia nonetheless. You have Zeriki, you have kind of like the Orthodox, you have the Sunni and the Shias, you have the Deo-Hellenic, which is really cool over in the Holy Land and things like that. You also have some Nestorian, which no mod would be complete without Nestorian, or Manichaean. Of course, same with the Zoroastrian. No mod would be complete without the Zoroastrian over here in Persia. Same for the Manichaean over in Persia. This is what the cultures look like. It, of course, is going to be Anatolian, which is actually in the same culture group as Greek, which is really interesting to see. You have, of course, the Pontic, which is from the base game. You also have Turkish, but Turkish is much further inland than it is in the base game of EU4, which makes sense as the Sultanate of Rum has not fully taken over Anatolia. We, of course, have the lovely Byzantine Romanian, the Byzantine Empire, basically, and they, of course, are Orthodoxy. They are still struggling with the iconoclasts, of course, the Bogomilists. However, those have not fully infested Byzantium yet. Instead, Byzantium still stays true to the faith and is Orthodox. We have Bulgaria, we have Wallachia, we have Hellas, who are basically a little Greek nation right here. They are still Orthodox, though. We have Antia, which is actually Paulician, which is really cool to see. We have Epirus, of course, who are Orthodox as well. We have this little tag right here, Samos, which is really cool. Going to the south, this is where stuff starts to become really cool. This is where we have the Holy Land. And the Holy Land is going to be a mix of various different tags. It's namely going to have basically a lot of the successive Crusader states, Crusader Jerusalem, the Kingdom of Antioch, Aleppo. All of these are basically kind of the little Crusader states here, and their religion speaks for themselves. We have the Deo-Hellenic, we have the Catholic, we have the other Catholic right here, and of course, like I mentioned before, the culture is Outremor, which is actually in the same culture group as the French, which is really cool to see. But looking back at the religions, we of course have some Catholic as well, some Sunni, as you would expect, some Bogomolist. It really is a very interesting hodgepodge here. And going into Arabia, everything is basically concentrated around the Ayyubids, the Abbasids, Omaha, and of course the Ayyubids here in the south, where we of course have the religion right here basically being almost entirely Sunni with a small mix of Shia in the south. This is the cultures right here. It is Bedouin, it is Yemeni, Omani, things like that. All of the culture grouping is basically the same as you would expect in the base game V4. We actually have Assyrian, and Assyrian is going to be grouped with all of these up here, which is really cool to see. We have the Alania, Georgia, Mesopotamia, which is really interesting. Mesopotamia is actually a vassal of Rum, so I imagine they probably don't stick around for very long. Going further east, we actually do have Persia. Persia is a holy state. They're a theocracy, and they are Zoroastrian, as you would expect. This is Zoroastrian Persia. But we actually have Berjlan, who is actually Manichaean, which is really cool. And go ahead and look at the religious map right here. We, of course, have the little mix of Manichaean, Zoroastrian, who are actually the exact same color. That's kind of interesting to see. We, of course, have some Buddhists right here, some Theravada and Savargiana. We, of course, have the Sunni, some Shia, kind of what you'd expect in even the base game of Persia. However, this mod really takes it to a whole nother level and adds the Zoroastrian and the Manichaean as well. And if you go even further east, we of course have the Sunnis and the Gurkids. And if you go ahead and go into India, this is where things really start to become really cool. You actually have Mamelukes. So I don't really know where this is from. Again, this mod is based off of a fantasy, so I imagine this was nothing that was probably in real life. However, you do have the Mamluks here in northern India, which is really interesting, and they are actually actually Sunni, so that's pretty cool. And if you look at the religions of India, it is pretty much how you'd expect, except for the exception of the Jains. So the Jains are actually a religion that technically exists in base game E4. If you don't know, it's an estate in India that you give out stuff to the Jains. However, it isn't an actual religion that you can convert to. So they exist as an estate. However, they don't exist as a religion, which I've never really understood, but that you can leave that to the devs. However, this mod does take that into account. So we actually do have the Jains existing with the Hindus and the Sunnis and the Shias, as well as the lovely Buddhists and things like that. So definitely a very cool little mix of religions. And these are the cultures that you have here in India. This is kind of the culture groupings. Pretty much what you would expect. Nothing too crazy around here. Even in the Mamluk little lands, it is pretty much the same. And going even further east, you probably were screaming at your screen for me to mention this, but there is the Mongol Empire, the lovely Mongol Empire, who are actually Tengri, which is really cool. The Mongols have actually not really pushed too far west. I guess they kind of have to fight the Cumans, which is interesting. You have some these other little tribes right here, and this is kind of how the religions look. Again, it is pretty much all going to be Tengri. However, the Mongols are interesting. They are Tengri, however, they're ruling over pretty much an almost entirely Buddhist state, which is interesting. I imagine the religious disunity goes crazy in the Mongol Empire. And going east, we have China, or the Great Jin here, and you actually have the Empire of China, which I don't know if I mentioned before, and this guy who is the ruler of the Great Jin actually is the Emperor of China. And surprisingly, which is kind of a first for a lot of these mods, the Emperor is actually gaining mandate, and the Empire of China is actually stable. Typically, I found with a lot of these interesting EU4 mods, especially the ones that alter the map or kind of have some weird history, the Empire of China basically is doomed to fail from the start, save for the HRE. But in this mod, they actually did a fantastic job in making it so that both the HRE and the Empire of China are actually working. So that is really neat to see, and they actually don't implode since they're both gaining mandate, which is really cool. This is how the religion looks. Not too much change here. It is going to be Confucian, as you would expect with the Empire of China. We have Shinto, which is not Buddhism, I've been told by multiple people, so I'm just going to say Shinto. Don't know what it is, but it's Shinto, and I didn't call it Buddhism, so now you can be happy. And to the south, we have Theravada and mixing with animism. Again, not really much change here. We have a little bit here, and this is kind of how the cultures look here in China. Again, this is kind of how the groupings look as well. Nothing too out of the ordinary here, as you would expect. Stuff in Southeast Asia really hasn't been changed, kind of neglecting Southeast Asia here. I think you do have some other stuff, like you have some Theravada and things like that, but I do think that is kind of all the same in the base game. This has been a mod review for the mod called Imperium Aurorae. All in all, I would give this mod definitely a 9 out of 10. This mod is fantastically made, and the fact that the Empire of China as well as that the HRE work is honestly a big plus for me. A lot of these mods completely neglect that and just kind of let these institutions just fall away and don't really change anything so that it works. But these mod creators did that, and the fact that this mod really hasn't received enough attention, I hope that this video will definitely bring more attention to it. So definitely a 9 out of 10 for Imperium Aurorae. But before you go, don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, don't forget to join the Discord. That is the best way to talk to me as well as other fellow EU4 content creators and players. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.